Hey everybody, how's it going? Dan Shinder here on Drum Talk TV with physical therapist Janice Ying. She's coming from Los Angeles. I'm coming from Globe, Arizona, east of Phoenix, up in the mountains where it's still freaking hot up here. I can't believe how hot it is at 4,000 feet. It's got to be horrible down there in LA with the smog, Janice.
It's warming up. It's warming up, but we're dealing with June gloom right now. So I'm enjoying this weather.
Awesome. So folks, we are here to talk about our focused topic today is going to be posture, setups, and ergonomics. And the thing here is that I'm going to show a bunch of pictures, and I'll repeat myself because some people will join after I've said this, but I'm going to show a bunch of pictures of people's setups, and in most cases, drummers playing those setups. And it's not to criticize them as drummers. As drummers, we often buy the gear and become faithful to the gear of what our heroes play. Some drummers emulate the setups that other drummers play whom they admire, and sometimes those setups might not be suitable for their body type. I'll give you an example. I used to be 5'8". I think after having all the kids and everything, I'm like 5'7" now. I'm 5'7". I weigh 155 on a really good day after lunch. And if I set up like Danny Carey, who's like 7 inches taller than I am, his arms are long, it wouldn't make sense. So that's just one example. So please don't hate on us for pointing out what could be wrong with someone's setup and even the way they are playing and what their posture is. That makes sense, everybody? Hopefully it does. So I'm going to show the images. I'm going to use my cursor to point out some things and ask Janice to facilitate what possible issues could this cause as far as injuries over time. Did I miss anything, Janice?
I don't think so. If I could just add one thing, it's
Sure.
one of the most common questions that I see, or the common thing that I see is like, oh, I should have good posture. They hear I'm a physical therapist. Hi, my name is Janice. Oh, what do you do? I'm a physical therapist. And everyone automatically just like shoots
Fix their
straight up and
posture.
like automatically has like really great posture. It's so funny. But like, it's so
That's
true.
funny.
But the question that I always ask people is like, well, what does good posture mean to you? And
Great.
most people, to them, means that, all of our lives since we were little, we've been told, oh, we just have to sit up straight or have to be like really tall and be really straight.
Rigid.
And sometimes you can actually overcorrect posture and you can be too straight, which could also be maybe not as bad as like when you're slouched forward or anything, or like in the typical bad posture that you think about. But being too straight or overcorrected is also not ideal either.
Have
And
you
the way
come
I like to
across that with
oh,
musicians
yeah,
who were in the
yeah.
military that maybe developed that from that
Military, and
experience?
I would say people who used to dance classically, like classical ballet,
And marching band,
or
maybe
and
drumline and stuff?
marching band where they have to be like really retracted and upright.
Yeah.
Um, and so people have this preconceived notion of like, oh, posture means that I have to just be like everything has to be as far pulled back as possible. And really, what posture in my mind should be, and what people should be thinking about, is posture is the the position that where your body can operate with the maximum efficiency. And that's
Mhm.
really what it is. It's like if you're too slouched forward, there's certain muscles that can't work as well because they're not going to be as efficient. If you're too far back, same thing, you can't generate the force if you're coming from way back there. So it's always somewhere in the middle, and our bodies are built. There's a curve in our spine for a reason. Our head balances on this curve, and it's all about that balance between it. So that's what I
Such
wanted to
great
kind of
points. Yeah.
preface
Yes.
before we delve into this. And this is something that I do kind of on a daily basis. I watch musicians play, and I analyze their playing, either in person in my clinic, which this is my clinic, or on video. So this is like right up my wheelhouse. So I love this like kind of fast pull card kind of thing
Yeah.
because I'm excited to see what you prepare for me today
That's
because I
cool.
haven't seen any of these things, right? Like,
Right, right. And I encourage people to if you're watching, two things. If you're watching and you have questions, because some of the things we cover that are related to bad ergonomics with the setup or repetitive motion injuries for basically any musician, whether it's violin, piano, clarinet, drums, whatever, even just moving your fingers like this over years and years and years can cause issues. Drumming, of course. So we cover bursitis, tendonitis, carpal tunnel, shoulder arches, sciatica, hip display, anything related to that. So ask questions. And if you want to put a photo in the comments of wherever you're watching, and I think it works especially better on Facebook. We're on Facebook and YouTube live right now. Go ahead and do that. And if I see it, and I don't know if it'll show the photo with your comment in StreamYard, but I'll keep it. I got the comments open, and
Cool.
I can, maybe Janice would be able to see it as well, I think. If
Yep.
not, Janice will go back over time and look at some of these and comment. Yeah. And you're always welcome to send those things in, folks, to drumtalktv.com, top right, video submissions and photo submissions. You could send that in, and we'll review it.
And then the last thing I'll add too is, whenever I'm watching someone play or doing analysis of someone playing, like my goal is not to comment on technique or change anything about technique. I usually, when I'm a musician, so like I do have that background, but I'm not a drummer. However, I do see a lot of drummers in my practice. But where I'm coming from is, how do we maximize efficiency, not necessarily the technique. Like, you guys are the experts in technique. I'm not going to mess with that. I'm not going to put my 2 cents in on it. But what I will do is, like, you know what? We can make your sound a lot more rounder. We can make your sound a lot bigger if you can generate your force from this area of your body versus this area of your body.
Right.
For
And
example.
minimize injuries or ongoing
Efficiency.
problems from the
More
bad setup.
efficiency equals less injuries, hopefully.
Yeah. And the better you feel, the better you play.
Exactly.
Which is why I always say you should smoke a lot of pot and drink before you play. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Okay, let's bring the first image up. This is BJ Wilson from Procol Harum, and his knees, I like how his femurs are parallel to the floor, but his knee is almost at the bottom of that drum. His wrist is higher than his elbow. This is almost backwards from how I see most drummers set up. Now, of course, apparently it worked for him, but again, we bring this up because someone else's setup that worked for them, and I don't know if he acquired, other issues from this setup from years and years, but even if it worked for him without injury, it doesn't mean it'll work for you. Definitely try some different things, but let your body do the speaking. So what potentially could happen with somebody with this setup if we look at, this angle here and how he's hitting the drum here, but yet his elbow's way down here? And what's the first thing that comes to mind, Janice?
Well, so if I didn't know who this person was, right, my first question, and I just saw this picture, my first question would be, what style of music does he play? What kind of music does he play? Does he play something loud? Is he something more of like a jazz drummer where it's a little bit potentially more mellow, or like the type of jazz that's a little bit more mellow? So that if I didn't know who this person was, that would be the first thing that kind of came to mind.
Yeah. And he is a rock player.
Right. So, if he's more of a heavy hitter, the things that I think about is it's going to be a lot harder for him to generate power into the drum head from here, because his elbows are lower than the surface of even like his snare, right? Like, and so then he's going to have to use a lot more wrist in order to get that power or to get that sound out, versus using like more full arm, full shoulder engagement, etc. I do like how his femurs are parallel. My bias would be, because if you look a little bit beyond his femurs, kind of like where he's sitting, or his pelvis, he's actually kind of like rolled back. So his low back is in a little bit of flexion. So he's kind of like curled forward. And it could be because the drums are so high, he's curling forward, but it also could be if he doesn't have enough flexibility in his hips, that is also forcing him to kind of tuck his tail underneath.
It's interesting
So
that you point that out. I just want to comment real quick because his
yeah,
head, the center of his head, is forward of the center of his butt, but yet
correct.
also from the top of his head to the center of his where he's sitting is almost a perfect letter C. It's quite a curvature.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite curved, and
Could that
so
cause scoliosis?
no, not
Okay.
typically. So Um, like there in scoliosis, there's two primary forms. There's like the developmental one, congenital or not congenital, primary developmental one, where as you're going through puberty, your spine starts curving, and then there's a functional scoliosis where maybe your body has adapted into a certain position, which is scoliosis. But
Mhm.
most people aren't just going to get scoliosis from or like having an actual change in their spine um necessarily. So yeah, I wouldn't say that that would necessarily develop into scoliosis, but
Mm.
if you look at like the upper back, that is what we call like excessive kyphosis. Kyphosis describes like from this angle, from the side angle, the sagittal plane, like that kind of curvature in the back. So he has more kyphosis. Some people have like their spines are really stiff and they can't get out of that kyphosis.
Right.
Or it could be that he has the flexibility, but just in this moment in time, he's
Yeah.
bent forward. Um,
Cool. I have
so
another
yeah,
image of him. There you
yeah,
can see where
interesting.
his butt is lower, that his femur isn't parallel.
Right,
So and
right.
it's not the same
But he's
show
sitting,
either.
yeah, right. And so you can see here that his like low back is actually pretty pretty darn good. And so
Yeah,
that kind of brings me to my next point that I was going to make is that um it's a lot more helpful, especially when looking at musicians, to get a video versus picture,
yeah.
because a picture is just like a snapshot in time, right?
This
It
could
could
have been a
be that
split
this
second
person is
right
like,
there. Like you said, he could have
yeah,
lunged
it could
for
have
that
been that
one
he's
hit.
just kind of like transitioning from one position to the next. um and so one thing that I always encourage people to look at, and you could do this for yourselves too, is like look at a video, turn the sound off, and then like look to see what the average position is. Like what position do you spend the most amount of time in? And yeah, you're going to move around. Like that's normal. That's what you need to do. But if you always return back to this slump position, okay, maybe that's something to look into a little bit. Or
Yeah,
if you have shoulder pain and you end up like reaching a certain way, okay, maybe that's something to look into. But um yeah, so when you can, if possible, video is always, especially now that we have access to more videos, right?
yeah.
Video is always a little bit more robust and helpful.
Cool. Let's look at this is our friend Zoltan Chaney,
Cool.
who plays in a couple different bands, Slaughter, and I believe with Vince Neil. Still, I showed this one because, and let me see if I can make it larger. There we go. Zoom in a little bit on Zoltan, where he's taller than I am. And again,
Yeah.
I'm short. I'm 5'7", 5'7.5". Zoltan's probably 5'11" to 6 foot, and he's sitting with his knees higher than his waist, I believe. It looks like it there. And I've seen him from the side of the stage. I've watched him play from
Hmm.
behind him and on the side of him. And you could see the height of his tom is right out. It's low,
Yeah.
almost the height of his top of his bass drum. His ride is there. His snare, of course, is probably equal to there. Everything's real
Right.
easy for him to get to. But I wonder if this ever causes anything. Like to me, that looks uncomfortable for my hip joint for me to play like that personally. But maybe for him, it works.
Yeah. I mean, it all comes back to how much flexibility he has in his hips to begin with, right? So some people, they can get away with doing that without compromising their spinal alignment. And this is a view looking from the back, so it's kind of hard to see whether he's like slumped forward or not. It doesn't really look like he's too curved forward. So, but I agree. Like the hips are a little lower than the knees, but maybe he has flexibility, and maybe this is where he feels like he can be the most nimble, kind of
Yeah.
moving around from the pedals and stuff.
Cool. Let's look at I don't know who this is, but oh, that's Buddy Rich. I just now this posture here is how I've seen him in every video and every photo, with the heavy top of the arches, curvature, and then the
Yep.
head more straight up rather than bowing down with that curvature, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, so like we talked about with the other picture, like he has a lot of like kyphosis in his upper back, so that rounded position. And if you're looking up, so like if I'll turn from the side, I don't have much like a kyphosis, but if you're rounded forward and you look up, what
Yeah,
that does is it puts a lot more motion, extension at the neck,
right.
versus like if you're curved forward and looking down, your neck is actually in a more neutral position,
Mhm.
which is neither better or worse, but like you just kind of understand the mechanics of the neck and kind of how that plays out, right? And so here you can see in his upper back area, he has a lot of that roundedness, that kyphosis, but then
Yeah.
in order to keep his head up, he has to arch his neck backwards a considerable amount to be able
You
to
have
look
to
the
look
world
forward.
in the face, right? And
Yeah,
so
interesting.
every change and every shift in your posture, there is a compensation for it, but not necessarily a compensation in a bad way necessarily, but just understand there's a cause and effect. So if
Yeah,
you change one thing, something else is going to have to shift in
yeah,
reaction to that.
yeah. Interesting comment from John Papalardo. John says, "The older you get, the more it hurts." Um, I'm I'm lucky. I'm 61, and I play pretty much without pain, and I'm sure it has nothing to do with I don't have perfect posture. And I tried to find a good picture of me. I'll come up with one for the next show or some video. Um,
Cool.
oh, I know where there's some video, but it might be hard to get to while we're doing this. But
No worries.
I'm lucky. I play with basically no pain unless I play for a long time. I get a little bit of nerve pain more so in my left hand, if I remember right. Um, and I'm embarrassed to say I have not played in a month, and I'm doing a show in 2.5 weeks where I'm going to be, I think we're doing like 22 songs. It's a tribute to the hits of Genesis and the Police. So starting tonight, I'm woodshedding really hard. We'll see if I come away with no pain. But yeah,
Nice.
I know that with age, things aren't as limber, things aren't as greased up. Depending on how you take care of yourself. I don't do stretching. I don't do yoga. I've been wanting to do yoga for the last 30 years, been busy, haven't gotten to it. So but for some people, the older you get, everything hurts getting out of bed. I remember getting up from a chair watching basketball with a friend of mine. And then when I got up, I went, "Ugh." He said, "What are you grunting for? You're only in your 60s." He's 92. So it's
Touche.
all relative, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's see who's next. Aha, Phil. So I'm going to show two pictures of Phil Collins. And this is about 1974, the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway tour. And the next picture I'm going to show is a few years later, where that posture is more accentuated, more like what we saw with Buddy. And this
Mm-hmm.
is 3 years later in 1977. And that is a normal Phil Collins posture, no matter what he's playing. He was almost always in that exact position. One of my favorite drummers, biggest influence. I've seen miles and miles of film footage and video footage and photos, and he's absolutely one of my heroes and an amazing influence.
For
So,
sure.
my wife just brought me donuts for National Donut Day. People, act
Ooh, did she bring
accordingly.
me one too?
Yeah, even if you have diabetes like I do, you can cheat once in a while. So there we go. Thank you. So same thing with Buddy there, and it's not as accentuated here, but even later it was even more when he had clean shaven, shorter hair in the late in
Yeah.
the into the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, totally. And like one thing I'll say is like with that kyphosis that we've been talking about, especially if you're like going up to hit like your crash cymbal or whatnot, um, if you don't have good flexibility in your spine, if you're doing that kind of motion repetitively, it can actually lead to some rotator cuff issues over time, like rotator cuff tendonitis, that kind of situation.
Mm,
So, um, yeah, and that's why it's important to make sure that your setup is appropriate, where you're not like reaching too too far away,
right.
um, especially those pieces that you are using more frequently. you could have something like a little further away that you maybe hit like twice a set or something like that. But if
Yeah,
you're
I
doing
have a
it like,
couple of those things. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I've seen many people who have like that one piece that has like this really unique sound, but like you only need it for like one or two pieces.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that's what I would say is like that common kyphotic or kind of like that slumped posture in the upper back. It can have effects on the shoulder, depending on how the setup is. If your setup is, kind of adapted to accommodate for that, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe you can kind of skirt around it, but if you have kind of like what I imagine as a traditional setup as being, I've seen people who have run across problems with that in the past.
When I was younger, in my teens and into my 20s, I used to sit really high. Alan White of Yes, the late great Alan White, used to sit pretty high with his femurs at maybe a 20-degree angle, whereas now I sit almost just like Phil, maybe slightly higher,
Yeah,
but where there's just a slight slant, and it's so much more comfortable. And
sure.
I've brought everything in. Like back in those days, and my setup was so
The
different.
bigger, the better. Yeah.
Yeah, from the audience, if I was on a drum riser, you could not see my
Oh,
face because
sure.
everything was so high and I was just buried in there. Now it's a whole different thing.
That's so
Um,
funny.
now that I don't know who this is, but if you look at their that's Ringo Starr. There we go. And I gotta fix my view real quick. Hold on. I just discombobulated the size of the screen. Here we go. Okay, for my view. There we go. Okay, back to Earth. Yeah, you can see how high Ringo is, and Alan wasn't
Yeah.
quite like that, but maybe even 6 inches lower if the seat is at the height of the middle of that drum or where the bottom head is. That's still kinda a high posture, wouldn't you say? Especially
Yeah,
considering
I
how
would.
low the tom is as well. He'd be reaching forward, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. And so again, a great drummer, and like his Beatles music is a little bit more on the not as like hard. It's not like he's playing death metal or something like that, right? And
Yeah,
so he could maybe get away with, because based on like the style of music that he was playing, maybe get away with it. But the consequence from having being so high and the drum being so low is again coming back to a fourth generation perspective. And
yeah,
so contrary to the first picture that we saw where he was like kind of like all jammed up and everything kind of has to come from the wrist and forearm, here he could use the arm. However, his sticks have to travel a lot further down, and so he's gonna have to use his wrist and go
right.
even further into that position in order to get some of those hits.
Especially for the floor tom on the other side. Imagine how low that
Right,
must be.
right, and so that's where you're gonna get into the trouble of, like, something called de Quervain's. Uh,
Yeah.
there's a fancy name, de Quervain's tendonitis, but basically it's another tendonitis, of a group of muscles kind of right here on top of the
Mhm.
forearm, that drummers can get fairly frequently, but it's usually because of kind of like overextending through here and not
Mhm.
controlling it. And so with that eccentric load, it could just kind of irritate all those structures in there.
Interesting. And I've seen this picture countless times over my lifetime, and I'm noticing something I never saw before. I don't know what that is down there. Maybe a giant I was
A
gonna say
bucket, or
coffee, but
is it like a little tom tom or a little
bongos maybe?
bongos?
Maybe it is because the stripe continues, then there's another maybe it's a set of bongos. How interesting. I never noticed that before. And he's playing in boots. That's got to be comfortable, right?
Right? Um,
And then we've got
yeah,
Terry Bozzio, moving into the age of progressive and
nice.
metal, where a lot of drummers set stuff up here for show, but then you've got that reach. Now, Terry's not short and he's not sitting very low, so that's not too far out of his reach. But correct me if I'm wrong, Janice, even if it's within reach, repetitive high reach like that, especially at fast speeds, and if anyone has seen Terry play, brah, 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 yeah, that's a lot of strain on the shoulder, these muscles and tendons here.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of people, again, like to set up like they're heroes, and that might not be right for their body type.
Right. So, yeah, it's one of those things where you kind of have to make the ergonomics and the artistry make sense. The showmanship too. It's a big thing. Like everyone wants to go see a flashy show, and
Yeah,
that's what he kind of has built his reputation on potentially, right?
exactly.
But there are ways that you can maybe modify things, maybe angle the symbols a little bit further down so you don't have to reach quite as high.
Hmm.
Or I don't know how this translates well, so you can jump in here with, but maybe even like getting longer sticks. Because like your arms are only so far, but you can
Right.
actually control the length of the stick. So maybe you don't have to reach quite so far because the sticks can
That's true. There
do
are some
that
sticks.
little bit more. And I just don't
Yeah.
know how people like I know people switch sticks all the time, but
Yeah.
maybe like if he's coming up on a song in the set that like does has a lot of that kind of motion, it could be, you switch out into a longer set of sticks so that it just kind of takes off the pressure of their shoulders just that much more.
Yeah. The variance I've seen in stick length, I think is maybe up to an inch and a half longer than the average
Yeah.
stick length, but an inch and a half is an inch
But
and a half.
that could make a big difference. Like, so
Yeah.
I'm not talking about 3 inches, like that would be
Right.
ridiculous. But like,
Yeah. It'd
but
be harder to
especially
swing and balance.
again, like every change that you make, there's a consequence to it, whether it's good or bad. So,
Yeah.
if there's a portion of the piece that, you really want to do a lot of flares and you want to just like, do a bunch of stuff. And then maybe like when you have a second to like switch them out, you could go back and you're just doing like the regular set in front of you. Like that
Mhm.
could be one possibility too.
Absolutely. Now, our friend Carmine Appice, another legendary drummer, he was one of the early ones to set up like that with the chinas really high like that. And I know that Dr. Nadia, who used to co-host this show with me, who introduced us, she interviewed Carmine about this, and I've talked to him about it. Both him and his brother Vinny have had shoulder work and replacements because of that.
Oof,
So they've been very overt about the
ouch.
fact that years and years of doing this for show really took its toll on them. And Carmen's like
That's too bad.
87 now. No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
He's like,
wow.
I think he's 75, 76. But uh but and even these little drums up here don't look too far out of reach. But these up here are the same thing as like what we saw with Terry Bozzio's kit in the last photo, and years of reaching far at fast speeds to get back down to the other thing. It'll take
Right,
its toll, just like
right,
athletes doing things that they only do when they play, but they do a lot of it.
right. Um, so yeah, it's one of those things where, of course, not a lot of people think about from like even like if you go like gig to gig, maybe even thinking about adjusting the setup for the gig itself versus like the standard setup that you always have it. Like there could
Yeah.
be variations. Like if a certain set is more dominant with a certain drum that you like have to like reach more, maybe move that one closer or something like that to
Mhm.
kind of help take some of the pressure off. So
Yeah.
um
So this is a series of pictures. Most people can glance at this and know that this is Neil Peart's kit, one of his setups. His setups changed over the years, but when he got to this particular setup, I want to focus on because this is from behind. And Neil was, I think,
that's
six
interesting.
three. I think 6'2", 6'3", if I remember right, maybe more. But if you notice these two drums in particular,
I don't think we can
and
see your cursor. Oh, there
if
it is.
if you look at this view here, oh yeah, I was pointing to the wrong. So I was referring
There we
to
go.
these drums here are also
Hmm.
these drums right here, and look how high they are. And that's he's not standing, he's sitting with his body twisted completely to the left and playing those as he comes around. And this is not a once in a while thing. This was something that Neil did, very often, was to, all kinds of stuff. But twisting the torso and reaching up that high had to have, even for someone tall, I think maybe cause some pain over time or discomfort. But I don't recommend that for someone my size.
Yeah.
That would just be up here for me, way up.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say if someone, like, has pain or not, because like,
Yeah,
you know, someone could be doing something for years and years and be totally fine, whereas someone does it for a week and then they're out of commission for a
right.
month, right?
Sounds like marriage. It could go either way.
Right, right. So, yeah, I mean, who I don't know if, you know, he has pain or not, but you know, you think about overall balance. So if that's the position that he's playing in the most, I would be curious to see what his rotation is like when he goes to the right. If he spends a
Yeah,
lot of time
it's
turning
not
to the
as
left. You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
it wasn't as much. It was much more the more he came around, the more ergonomic it was for him. And I never heard of okay, so here's how it is, folks. I never and I know anyone that knows Neil's story before he passed away, there was a fake story that he stopped drumming because of arthritis, pain in his hands. And that was to cover up the fact that he was very ill, had a brain tumor, and they just didn't want to let people know what was going on. Totally respect that. Totally respect that. But never heard anything about pain in his torso or the reach. And that might be because it was fine for him, and that's okay. We're not saying
yeah,
Neil's setup was wrong for him. That's not what
no,
we're
not at
saying. We're
all.
saying if Neil was one of your favorite drummers, don't set up just like he did because you liked how he set up if it hurts you to play with that setup. Someone like me that's too short to have everything that high, it's not smart to do that. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, and I think like the thing that I always think about when I am trying to emulate someone is like what is it that I like about that artist? Is it because of the type of sound that they produce, or is it the energy that they have, or you know, XYZ? And how will like what will help me get there? Could it be the setup? Maybe. But if you're trying to develop a certain kind of quality behind your playing, maybe use the setup to get to that, like change the setup so that you can create the sound that you're actually looking to replicate or kind of
Right.
honor.
Yeah.
Because like drums or any instrument is just a tool. So you could give someone the like a tiny kid toy drum drum kit and put it in front of like the most epic drummer on the face of the planet, and they would probably make it sound incredible, right?
Right.
And then if you put a I don't know, a $10,000 drum in front of someone who is only like 4 months into learning, which no offense to them or anything, but but they would only be able to do the drum so much justice because they don't have the technique and the know-how of how to manipulate that drum to create the tone that they want.
Exactly. You know, I think I found where I could pull up a video real quick of me playing, and I'd love for
Okay.
you to rate my setup. However, it comes with a
Okay.
this setup is not my normal setup. It's a little the front tom is higher than normal because I'm playing with a 26-inch bass drum, and it was a little high for me, and even the timpanis weren't adjustable to go as low as mine go. But let me see if pulling this video up works. I just need a second, folks. Let's do this, and then I can advance to a certain part of the video. Bear with me, everybody. Let's see. See if I can make this work. Okay, here it comes. I think it's refreshing, and then I'll pull it up. I just want to get past the part where there's a big introduction. Okay, and folks, guess what? You're getting a sneak peek of something that's coming out on our documentary very soon. So let me
Ooh,
see if I can. Yeah, this is. I'm
how
just
lucky.
realizing that this is exclusive. Let's see if I can make this work. All right, here we go, folks. I'll let it play for a while, Janice, and then you can maybe take notes while it's playing. So you'll see,
Cool.
folks, the end of the introduction before the concert starts from our 10-year anniversary. Here we go. Is it playing? You can see it.
Yeah, it's not playing right now, but
Oh, there it
was
is. Okay,
playing.
great. Here we go. Whoops. Oh, it's going to be sticky. Darn it. Let me see if I can. Oh, I should show the actual file. This is pausing and stuff. Okay, that's not going to work. Let me see if I can get to it real quick. Let me just think.
Sure.
Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Bear with me, folks. Okay, I can get rid of that. I can get rid of that. Okay, I'm gonna find it real quickly. I want to show everybody this.
Yeah.
Oops, wrong one. I want to remove it. Okay. Stop screen share. Janice, while I'm digging this up, maybe you could talk about some of the other most common things for people to watch out for with repetitive motion injuries as it relates to drummers.
Yeah. So I think the main thing that I typically see is that where people are doing too much work from their arms and not generating as much force or like from their shoulders or their core. Um, and so that's actually what tends to lead more to kind of like these overuse injuries, such as like tennis elbow or even like golfer's elbow. So for those of you who don't know, like tennis elbow describes pain on the outside of the elbow. If you're looking at the arm like this, it'd be on like the thumb side, whereas golfer's elbow is on the inside of the elbow. And the reason why they're different is because you have different groups of muscles that attach on either side. So all the muscles that flex the fingers here attach here where the golfer's elbow would be. And then the muscles that attach on this side are all the ones that open your hand, that extend your
Oh,
fingers.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you actually, when you're gripping something or where you're holding a stick or you're like doing a hit, both the flexors and the extensors are working at the same time, because otherwise if you're gripping and only those muscles are working, your wrist is going to end up like this. So you actually need the opposite muscles to help keep your wrist neutral, so that when you're trying to maintain a neutral wrist position, that these back muscles are kind of keeping it in place, and so it's not kind of being overpowered by the wrist flexors.
That makes
but
sense.
But yeah, so if you're not supporting yourself though with from your shoulders or from your core, and you're only doing the movements from your forearms or your elbows, that's where people really can run into a lot of problems over time. And I know we've
Cool.
talked about this before too in the past, about like carpal tunnel or other kind of like nerve related injuries. Carpal tunnel syndrome is where the median nerve, as it crosses the carpal tunnel, is like right here. So you have one of the three major nerves that go into your arm. There are more, but like three major, like super highways, I guess you could call them, that go into the hand. And so carpal tunnel, you'll get numbness and tingling in like these fingers here, and then half of the ring finger. And then if you have numbness in these fingers, it's a different nerve. It's the ulnar nerve. But with vibration and like with overuse and like gripping, those kind of activities, people can be a little bit more prone to developing carpal tunnel as well.
Cool.
So yeah, any kind of like those overuses, or if you use your mouse a lot or you use the computer a lot, if you're texting a lot too, that can also contribute to the overall overworking nature of things.
Cool. Well, rate
So
my posture. I found a video. I'm going to share the screen. Feel free to rip me a new one after I show some of this video.
can't wait.
here, here, here
Just
we
kidding.
go. There'll be some shots of me. No matter what, try to find my way to the same old jam. Good times, sad times, I've had my share. When I want to let off Can you make anything out of that?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess my question is, like, how did you feel? Like, do you remember back to when you played that set, like how you felt overall, like
I
physically?
did. The one thing that was a little out of place for how I normally set up was that rack tom, because the bass drum, even just those extra 2 inches, my bass drum on my kit, here's the thing, is 24 inches. That was a 26. That's not the big difference. What the big difference is that my kit, my big blue progressive kit, that 24-inch bass drum is not right in front of me. I sit
Mm,
naturally and it's cocked to the right, which leaves room for me to lower those two toms that are on a stand more, whereas that is facing forward. I set that up just like John Bonham's kit, same sizes, so it's directly in front, which made that drum higher. So this hand was having to reach and hit a little higher, not further, but higher. It didn't hurt, but I had to get
right,
used to it. And I didn't have
right.
that kit set up for the rehearsal the day before. So it was like sound check was the first, other than
Yeah,
that.
and I mean, that's, honestly the reality of a lot of pro players, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're not playing on your kit from gig to gig, like you might be getting like backline stuff, like it might be different every night.
And
So
it's not always able to be set up exactly the same way.
right, or exactly. So, there are challenges and limitations to that. I did notice that because if you go back to the video, you can and hopefully you'll have this accessible so people, if they needed to go back and kind of look back to
Yeah,
like what I'm talking about.
yeah, and
Um,
I'll show a
but
little more
it
after you explain that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so
so they can
it seems
reference.
like the right, or sorry, the left shoulder is kind of like hiked up a lot more often than your right
Mm,
side. And so I'm kind of looking at the balance. The other thing that kind of you talking about your setup kind of makes a little bit more sense to me now is I noticed that you were kind of like jammed back, like your shoulders were like a little bit more pinched
mm.
back sometimes. And that could be because of was it the bass drum that you said was too far or bigger in front of you?
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
that could be that it's like you're used to having everything else at a certain distance, but then the bass
yeah,
drum kind of jammed you up a little bit. So like if you're having to play something, it's a lot harder to generate force from back here than it is a little bit more in front of you.
yeah.
Um, so
I
that
wanna
that
watch
is one
for
thing.
that. Now that you mentioned that, I wanna play this just another minute and watch for that,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, let's check it out, folks. Where's the play button? Oh, there we go. I should have skipped ahead a little bit. Here it comes.
That's okay.
I think there'll be a behind shot again.
Like this all looks pretty good just because you're like right in front of you. But you see how like kind of
Yeah,
your elbows are like a little bit more behind where your
you're
body
right.
is. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
yeah. So I mean, like again, like now if you came in to see me, you're like, hey, like I've been having pain in the front of my shoulder, and I watched that. I was like, okay, well that could be something. But
Yeah.
is you having your arms that far back while you're playing gonna lead
That's
to
not normal.
problems? Not
Yeah,
always, and it's not normal for you. And so,
yeah.
you know, kind of
And one
understanding
night of it
this is
wasn't a
different.
problem.
Right. But if you're doing this day in, day out, and you're playing, 4 shows a week, and you're doing like all this stuff, like that could add up over time, but
Yeah.
not necessarily, but it could.
Mhm.
So again, like if someone came in off the street and like you, and you're like, I don't really deal with that many problems, etc. And I watch them play, I'm like, you know what? I notice these things, but is it contributing to anything? Not sure. However, if you came in and said, I've been experiencing like back pain and shoulder pain and XYZ, and I looked at this video, you can maybe make some connections with that, but I wouldn't go and like overhaul someone who, you
Yeah.
know, play with this once and um and then like
Interesting.
I think the only other thing that maybe I would have you play around with, if you ever ended up back in this setup, is like maybe even just like raising the chair just like an inch, like
Yeah.
not that much, but like just an inch, just given that like everything that what you're saying, like it's kind of higher than what you're used to, so you kind of have to compensate for that slightly.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Folks, I hope you've
Thanks for
enjoyed this.
sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, we'd love to see yours. We do this show once a month. Feel free to send in videos or photos. And you can send them in to be posted, as well as send them in and indicate in the form that you want to be featured on Drumming Injury Talk. And Janice will evaluate your setup. And it's not to criticize you, it's to give you some tips that could help you ergonomically and prevent some injury or chronic pain that you're experiencing from something that you love to do that you don't realize is from that. So thanks. You can follow Janice in the links that are indicated in the post. You can follow Drum Talk TV on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Vimeo, and whatever that guy's calling that other thing. X, Y, Z, something like that. X. And
I love that like happened like years ago, and we're still doing
and it
we're
still
still
doesn't
confused
stick.
about what it's called.
So is he. Um,
Yeah, right. True.
but yeah, send your stuff in, folks, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Within a month, we will be back. And thank you, Janice, so much for taking time again. Really appreciate it.
Always fun, always fun.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Stay tuned for more Drum Talk TV interviews, original series, videos from our fans, documentaries. We've got a big show coming up in Oregon on Lake Oswego that benefit a national organization that benefits fallen police officers or those who lost their jobs due to injuries. So stay tuned for news on that, as well as the Drum Talk TV membership site. Thanks, everybody.